Hello. Donc, Principles of Art, Collingwood. The company are going through the motions of acting a play, and yet no play is being acted. This is not because there have been interruptions, breaking the thread of the performance. A work of art is very tolerant of interruption. The intervals between acts at a play do not break the thread, they rest the audience. Nobody ever read the Iliad on the Commedia at a sitting, but many people know what they are like. What happens at the dress rehearsal is something quite different from interruption. It can be described by saying that every line, every gesture, falls dead in the empty house. The company is not acting a play at all. It is performing certain actions which will become a play when there is an audience present to act as a sounding board. It becomes clear, then, that the aesthetic activity which is the play is not an activity on the part of the author and the company together, which this unit can perform in the audience's absence. It is an activity in which the audience is a partner. Anyone probably can learn this by watching a dress rehearsal. But the principle does not apply to the theatre alone. It applies to rehearsals by a choir or orchestra, or to a skilled and successful public speaker rehearsing a speech. A careful study of such things will convince anyone who is open to conviction that the position of the audience is very far from being that of a licensed eavesdropper, overhearing something that would be complete without him. Performers know it already. They know that their audience is not passively receptive as what they give it, but is determining by its reception of them how the performance is to be carried on. A person accustomed to extempore speaking, for example, knows that if once he can make contact with his audience, it will somehow tell him what he's to say, so that he finds himself saying things he had never thought of before. Ça, c'est intéressant, page 222 pour l'improvisation. 322 pour l'improvisation. These are the things which, on that particular subject, he and nobody else ought to be saying to that audience and no other. People to whom this is not a familiar experience are, of course, common, but they have no business to speak in public. It is a weakness of printed literature that this reciprocity between writer and reader is difficult to maintain. The printing press separates the writer from his audience and fosters cross purposes between them. The organization of the literary profession and the technique of good writing, as that is understood among ourselves, consists to a great extent of methods for mitigating this evil. But the evil is only mitigated and not removed. It is intensified by every new mechanization of art. The reason why gramophone music is so unsatisfactory to anyone accustomed to real music is not because the mechanical reproduction of the sounds is bad, that could be easily compensated by the hearer's imagination, but because the performers and the audience are out of touch. The audience is not collaborating, it is only overhearing. The same thing happens in the cinema, where collaboration as between author and producer is intense, but as between this unit and the audience non-existent. Performances on the wireless have the same defect. The consequence is that the gramophone, the cinema, and the wireless are perfectly serviceable as vehicles of amusement or of propaganda, for here the audience's function is merely receptive and not concreative. But as vehicles of art, they are subject to all the defects of the printing press in an aggravated form. Why, one hears it asked, should not the modern popular entertainment of the cinema, like the Renaissance popular entertainment of the theatre, produce a new form of great art? The answer is simple. In the Renaissance theatre, collaboration between author and actors on the one hand, and audience on the other, was a lively reality. In the cinema, it is impossible. The conclusion of this chapter may be summarized briefly. The work of artistic creation is not a work performed in any exclusive or complete fashion in the mind of the person whom we call the artist. That idea is a delusion bred of individualistic psychology, together with a false view of the relation not so much between body and mind as between experience at the psychical level and experience at the level of thought. The aesthetic activity is an activity of thought in the form of consciousness, converting into imagination an experience which, apart from being so converted, is sensuous. This activity is a corporate activity belonging not to any one human being but to a community. It is performed not only by the man whom we individualistically call the artist, but partly by all the other artists of whom we speak as influencing him, where we really mean collaborating with him. It is performed not only by this corporate body of artists, but, in the case of the arts of performance, by executants, who are not merely acting under the artist's orders, but are collaborating with him to produce the finished work. And even now the activity of artistic creation is not complete. For that there must be an audience, whose function is therefore not a merely receptive one, but collaborative too. The artist, although under the spell of individualistic prejudices he may try to deny it, stands thus in collaborative relations with an entire community. Not an ideal community of all human beings as such, but the actual community of fellow artists from whom he borrows, executants whom he employs, and audience to whom he speaks. By recognizing these relations and counting upon them in his work, he strengthens and enriches that work itself. By denying them, he impoverishes it. Conclusion. The aesthetician, if I understand this business aright, is not concerned with dateless realities lodged in some metaphysical heaven, but with the facts of his own place and his own time. These, at any rate, are what I have concerned myself with in writing this book. The problems I have discussed are those which force themselves upon me when I look round at the present condition of the arts in our own civilization, and the reason I have tried to solve them is because I do not see how that condition, both of the arts and of the civilization to which they belong, can be bettered unless a solution is found. Our business, as I said before, is to cultivate our garden, but gardens may get into such a state that they are no longer cultivable without help from chemists and engineers and other experts on whom, in happier times, the gardener would look with a hostile eye. My final question, then, is how does the theory advanced in this book bear upon the present situation and illuminate the path to be taken by artists in the immediate future? To begin by developing a general point already made in the preceding chapter, we must get rid of the conception of artistic ownership. In this sphere, whatever may be true of others, la propriété c'est le vol. We try to secure a livelihood for our artists, and God knows they need it, by copyright laws protecting them against plagiarism. But the reason why our artists are in such a poor way is because of that very individualism which these laws enforce. If an artist may say nothing except what he has invented by his own sole efforts, it stands to reason he will be poor in ideas. If he could take what he wants wherever he could find it, as Euripides and Dante and Michelangelo and Shakespeare and Bach were free, his larder would always be full and his cookery might be worth tasting. This is a simple matter, and one in which artists can act for themselves without asking help, which I am afraid they would ask in vain, from lawyers and legislators. Let every artist make a vow, and here among artists I include all such as write or speak on scientific or learned subjects, never to prosecute or lend himself through persecution under the law of copyright. Let any artist who appeals to that law be cut by his friends, asked to resign from his clubs, and cold-shouldered by any society in which right-thinking artists have influence. Un peu fort quand même. It would not be many years before the law was a dead letter, and the stranglehold of artistic individualism in this one respect a thing of the past. This, however, will not be enough unless the freedom so won is used. Let all such artists as understand one another, therefore, plagiarize each other's work like men. Let each borrow his friend's best ideas and try to improve on them. If A thinks himself a better poet than B, let him stop hinting it in the pages of an essay. Let him rewrite B's poems and publish his own improved version. If X is dissatisfied with Y's this year Academy picture, let him paint one caricaturing it, not a sketch in Punch, but a full-size picture for next year's Academy. I will not rely upon the banking committee's sense of humor to the extent of guaranteeing that they would accept it, but if they did, we should get brighter Academy exhibitions. Or if he cannot improve on his friend's ideas, at least let him borrow them. It will do him good to try fitting them into works of his own, and it will be an advertisement for the creditor. An absurd suggestion? Well, I am only proposing that modern artists should treat each other as Greek dramatists or Renaissance painters or Elizabethan poets did. If anyone thinks that the law of copyright has fostered better art than those barbarous times could produce, I will not try to convert him. Next, with regard to the arts of performance, where one man designs a work of art and another, or a group of others, executes it. Ruskin, who was not always wrong, insisted long ago that in the special case of architecture, the best work demanded a genuine collaboration between designer and executants. Not a relation in which the workmen simply carried out orders, but one in which they had a share in the work of designing. Ruskin did not succeed in his project of reviving English architecture because he only saw his own idea dimly and could not think out its implications, which was better done afterwards by William Morris, but the idea he partly grasped is one application of the idea I shall try to state. In these arts, I am especially thinking of music and drama, we must get rid, to put it briefly, of the stage direction as developed by Mr. Bernard Shaw. When we see a play swathed and lauded with these excrescencies, we must rub our eyes and ask, what is this? Is the author, by his own confession, so bad a writer that he cannot make his intention clear to his producer and cast without composing a commentary on his play that makes it look like an edition for use in schools? Or is it that producers and actors, when this queer old stuff was written, were such idiots that they could not put a play on unless they were told with this intolerable deal of verbiage exactly how to do it? The author's evident anxiety to show what a sharp fellow he was makes the first alternative perhaps the more probable. But really there is no need for us to choose. Whether it was the author or the company that was chiefly to blame, we can see that such stuff, clever though the dialogue is in its way, must have been written at a time when dramatic art in England was at its lowest ebb. I am only using Mr. Shaw as an example of a general tendency. The same tendency is to be seen at work in most plays of the later 19th century, and it is just as conspicuous in music. Compare any musical score of the late 19th century with any of the 18th, not of course a 19th century edition, and see how it is sprinkled with expression marks as if the composer assumed either that he had expressed himself too obscurely for an executant to make sense of the music, or that the executants for whom he writes were half-witted. I do not say that every stage direction in the book of a play or every expression mark in a musical score is a mark of incompetence either in the author or in the performer. I dare say a certain number of them are necessary. But I do say that the attempt to make a text foolproof by multiplying them indicates a distrust of his performers on the part of the author, which must somehow be got rid of if these arts are to flourish again as they have flourished in the past. If anyone says that these stage directions are intended not for the theatre but for the reader, I still object to them on grounds arising out of the author's relation to his audience. I dare say Mr. Shaw thinks that it is not so much the actors as the public that are false. I shall show later on that this is no better. This cannot be done at a blow. It can only be done at all if we fix our eyes on the kind of results we want to achieve, and work deliberately towards it. We must face the fact that every performer is of necessity a co-author, and develop its implications. We must have authors who are willing to admit their performers into their councils, authors who will rewrite in the theatre or concert room as rehearsals proceed, keeping their text fluid while the producer and the actors, or conductor and orchestra, help to shape it for performance. Authors who understand the business of performance so well that the text they finally produce is intelligible without stage directions or expression marks. We must have performers, including producers and conductors, but including also the humblest members of cast and orchestra, who take an intelligent and instructed interest in the problems of authorship, and are consequently deserving of their author's confidence and entitled to have their say as partners in the collaboration. These two results can probably be best obtained by establishing a more or less permanent connection between certain authors and certain groups of performers. In the theatre, a few partnerships of this kind are already in existence, and promise a future for the drama that must yield better work on both sides than was possible in the bad old days. Not yet, unfortunately, at an end, when a play was hawked from manager to manager, until at last, perhaps with a bribe of cash, it was accepted for performance. Oui, il reste 8 pages. Est-ce que je finis? Bonsoir Khaled, désolée, je ne vois ton message que maintenant que tu n'es plus là. Excusez-moi, je viens de voir que Neymar Naouri a liké ma story, c'est un peu incroyable. Incroyable. C'est incroyable, pardon. OK, je me concentre. C'est juste incroyable. Et elle m'a repartagé en story, évidemment, parce que OK, incroyable. Un peu incroyable quand même. Bon, on continue. Ah non, vas-y, je finis. Salut.